Welcome to our Nightmare on CMDB Street webinar with Eric Jones, David Limas, and John Gillespie, and your host, Brett Carl. So today we're going to talk about protecting systems and networks on ServiceNow. So we'll go ahead and jump right into it. First of all, happy Halloween to everyone. We just want to go ahead and introduce ourselves, and we'll get into a little bit about GlideFast, and then we'll jump into security and CMDB and everything else you've been looking forward to on this webinar here. So just to start, my name is Brett Carl, the VP of Solutions and Alliances at GlideFast Consulting, about 11 years in the ServiceNow ecosystem. Looking forward to educating and talking to everybody about security with CMDB. And David?
Thanks, Brett. David Limas here. Been in the ServiceNow ecosystem for coming up on a decade, namely in the GRC, IRM, and SecOps realm as a solutions consultant and architect, and also been an instructor for vulnerability response and third-party risk. Eric?
Yeah, so my name is Eric, and I've been in the ServiceNow ecosystem, kind of like with David, a little over a decade here. But prior to that, I was actually a customer in the security operations realm. So I've got a unique take, both on the ServiceNow solutions consulting side, but then also in the security world as well.
And I'm John Gillespie, Service Delivery Manager here at GlideFast, and Certified Technical Architect specializing in integrated risk management, governance, risk, and compliance. Been working in ServiceNow for 15 years.
So while John's got his beat, I think collectively we're just shy of 50 years of total experience here on the platform. So thank you, gentlemen, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So let's get into GlideFast Consulting and talk about a little bit of our expertise. So GlideFast has over 4,700 collective ServiceNow certifications across our 600 plus expert consultants. We're the largest sole source elite partner in the ServiceNow space. Last year in 2023 and this year in 2024, we were Customer Workflow Partner of the Year. We maintain a 4.6 out of 5 CSAT score with over 2,500 successful projects. And one thing we wanted to call out is that we do have validated practices across multiple products in ServiceNow, but specifically for this webinar, the vulnerability response practice and our integrated risk management practice. So essentially you have your PLAs, or your product line achievements with ServiceNow. That's where you have to prove you have the proper CSAT score, certain number of deployments, a number of resources. But the validation takes you a step further, where we're actually interviewed as an organization to prove that we're a real practice. We're not subcontracting to obtain those deployments and resources. And it really you're rated on how mature your practice is. So for GlideFast, you can be assured that we are experts in this space, and looking forward to working with our customers to make them successful in the IRM and vulnerability and security space for ServiceNow. I want to pass it over to Eric, where he's going to talk about the importance of cybersecurity.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So a little bit more about myself, right, in that regard. I go back to a day and a time when security was viewed technical, right? We had a lot of tools, but a lot of it was centered around protecting the end. We didn't really reach into the organization as a security practice. Instead, we talked about your firewall. We talked about maybe some antivirus and maybe a little bit of endpoint protection. But I think it's important as we look into the 2020s and beyond that we talk about what cybersecurity really is before we even talk about why we're here today, right? We can really go back to that, where before it was really technical. Now we start to see a lot more conversation around what we consider the CIA triad, right? Where we really look at cybersecurity now more holistically to the whole organization of, if this were to happen, do we affect or impact our confidentiality of data? Do we affect or impact the integrity? Was our data stolen or manipulated? As well as the availability. Because let's face it, we can have a system outage that has nothing to do with security, but there is a security impact of that system going down. And when we really think about that triad, and we start to really see a lot of the reason why this becomes that much more important. just a few key statistics that we start to see out of the more recent view of cybersecurity that we can see here on the screen. But a couple of them that I really wanted to hone in on there are at the bottom. Cybersecurity is no longer about nearly as much active penetration-based, fingerprint targeted attack as much as it is about exploitation. According to Verizon's DBIR, right, we see a massive, near double increase in vulnerability being the path in. So we talk a lot about reactive, proactive system approach. Well, when we really see what vulnerability is, it's a thing or a weakness, a flaw that's found on a device. And that's where we really look to tie a lot of things together. We really tie risk and we tie program and everything else that goes with this. And then the other statistic that's really quite alarming and intriguing is that 86% number you see. 86%, according to interviews done by Splunk this year, 86% of security professionals either plan to or will have to shift their budget to look at compliance and regulation. And I think that's really important to today's conversation. As we start to see that more holistic shift, right? Security is no longer about the analyst. Security is also no longer about the threat when it happens or if it happens. It's about what that threat means to your organization before it even happens. And so as we kind of segue right into the next slide where we talk about what this really is today, right? In 2019, ServiceNow sponsored, along with Ponemon, a survey titled The Cost and Consequences in Gaps in Vulnerability Response. Within that survey, a few key things that they really started to talk about, right? And highlighting this one major statement. In 2019, which feels like it was a while ago, a majority of organizations still did not have visibility into applications, services, servers, devices, things on their network, maybe not concrete things, tangible things, but we talk about the code, the applications, the structure, the people that can get into it across their organization. And given that that was done in 2019, and we all know some of the world events that were happening, coming out of that pandemic and coming out of a lot of that world event view, I would venture to guess a lot of your organizations could say that even more strongly today. There may have been a focus at one point of, system awareness and service awareness. Well, a pandemic, a lot of economic changes lit the fire under a lot of organizations, and we have a lot of shift and a lot of move and a lot of prioritization changes to where now even more we see a much larger problem with that visibility. So it becomes important to really focus in on that visibility when we start to talk about why, right? Why do we focus in on ServiceNow as a tool for this, and why do we focus in on the program of cybersecurity? So as we shift into the why ServiceNow part of this, I really want you to think about this quote, especially what I capitalized in there of visibility, right? Why do we seek visibility out, and how do we do that in a much more efficient way? So if we take a look at our next slide at a few key bullet points, right? Visibility, efficiency, interoperability, automation. When we talk about ServiceNow, and I venture to guess because you all came to a GlideFast promoted and a GlideFast based webinar today, that you have some exposure, impact, or importance of ServiceNow in your environment, whether you're already a customer, you're considering it, maybe you're a larger organization that maybe you're looking into how do we make it better, right? When we talk about ServiceNow and ServiceNow SecOps, I think one of the things that we really have to do is first define SecOps. Because I can pick any tool and they're going to tell you that they can do SecOps, right? think an interesting dive into the history here is SecOps, the term and the real meat of it came out of DevOps. Imagine that, right? So DevOps was really started with sort of an eye towards a systemness, collaboration, rapid uptick in feature parity or feature deployment across maybe at the time disparate teams. You had your server team, you had your code team, you had your feature team, you had your front end team that were all kind of working in their own little silos, right? So DevOps started to try to bring tools, automations, collaborations, and pieces that allowed people to work under one pipeline, one effort. That's where SecOps comes in, right? A lot of those same features really bring in that same benefit, being able to stitch your security organization together. Because security, as I led into this, right, security is not just your security team anymore, and it's not technical anymore. You're going to always have those technical components, but you now have to consider so much more of that. So understanding that SecOps is really about the team as a whole, the collaboration, the kind of as a code, if you will, right? We start to see that benefit in a system like ServiceNow, where a lot of your organizations probably have a lot of the core in there. Maybe you're managing your user base. Maybe you're integrating with Active Directory for user information. You probably have some of that service desk, help desk, incident management, maybe even as far as change and problem. And all of that already keys off of this central concept of a CMDB. So you already start to have some efforts around having your asset in there. And you have some of those other teams that play a big role in today's security organization. So it's natural that we're able to say that you get a wider visibility, that it's very quick to fold in the technical folks, the IT folks, your leadership, your CISOs, your IT directors, and start to see all of those come together. Not only do we start to see that, but we also see that system approach to other portions within that organization, like your compliance. You saw in that first slide, 86% of professionals are planning to shift, not just spend more, but actually shift and replace budget into that compliance view. But then we get into a lot of the other points where we talk about efficiency, interoperability, right? Being able to switch very rapidly between vulnerability and security, and then maybe even into compliance. And we also talk about the platform having a lot of automation capabilities. I don't think we can go through a webinar without mentioning some of the AI functionality, but in reality, right, we start to see AI as kind of a driver to that, but we really see the ability to click button resolve. And we now have this system that already in a lot of your organizations ties into all of those other pieces. Incidents, you probably have some data feeds. You're probably bringing in things like your system asset tools, SCCMs, Intunes, maybe even like your big fixes and other tools of management like that naturally become a point of automation. So it's important that we start to see that approach, right? Where integrating with all of those in platform here gets you that one place to go. I joke, I'll call it the one tool to rule them all in a lot of ways here. When we talk about some of the best practices that get you there quicker, right? You all enrolled because of a flashy marketing thing that said, how do you get better playbooks? How do you do this more efficiently? How do you be more proactive, right? This is where it really meets the road, right? And one of the first things that I can't hone in on or recommend enough, right, is training. This is really where it matters. We can implement technical tools all day long, right? But if team A and team B across your organization don't understand the why, don't understand the how, don't understand the what we're doings, then a lot of that's going to fail. And we don't want failure in security. And in some ways, that can create its own security nightmare and issue as well. So start to bring in, right? You start talking that training and collaboration, and you start to talk about, before we even get to how do we do security better, bring the people in. Start to collaborate across all the other teams. Allow security to become more than security. let's talk to your IT teams. And a lot of customers, when I'm in front of them and I ask them, why do you care about a certain server? Why do you care about a certain environment? How do you know within your security organizations? How do you know to focus on that? It's a lot of blank stares a lot of time. But when we start to reach out, say, okay, cool, security folks, you don't know that, but I bet you if you go talk to the person running that server, they can tell you why it's important. So now we start to fold in. Cool. Guess what? Your security people can be asset people. Your security people can actually impact your CMDB. Start to populate risk and exposure values. They know a lot more, but by the same token, right? The old cliche, security starts with you. It applies, right? Your server owner, your DevOps pipeline owner, you'll hear that term DevSecOps, right? Starting with security as part of that deployment. There's a mindset there and a shift there in the industry that security really starts to roll out into other folks. As a developer, I need to know how to write code that is secure and without weakness. And because I need to know all that, go talk to everybody, go involve them, right? My last part in here, those last two, security as a code and simplifying security, right? It sounds counterintuitive to talk about bringing other people in, start looking at all your technical solutions. We mentioned that ServiceNow can do a lot of automations and orchestrations for you. Hey, password is compromised, go reset password. Somebody doesn't even have to touch that, right? But in a lot of times, your human is better, right? Maybe for some reason, we're just not quite there. And we just don't quite know the level of confidence in a tool to go reset that password. Maybe it's a high impact individual in your organization with high visibility or high access. We probably don't want to allow a tool to just blindly do it. So we're going to evaluate that. We're going to ask a person, right? Where we can automate, but also don't forget that you have people there. Those people can be people like your asset owners, but it can be staff, right? If we talk your CIOs, your CEOs, right? Even those people matter. But going back over to some of that training and collaboration perspective, once we start to take your program and organization, right, and we look at the platform as a whole, we look at all those individual pieces, we start to see a much more holistic view of what security is in your organization. And now we can start to take that and fold that into ServiceNow. We can start to talk about what all that is. And in a lot of cases, that starts with risk, right? We saw that statistic, compliance, regulation. All of those audits are really starting to trend up in prove it, control it, not just show me, right? And so we start to get into the need to actually have a controls-based program or a controls-based organization. We can do all the tech all day long. We can talk about a SIM integration with a SOAR like ServiceNow and doing all of that incident response and resolution. But until you can drive your analysts and you can drive your staff with this is why, it's hard to get that buy-in and it's hard to get a cultural change, but it's also hard to show. And that's where we really start to really stitch in a risk-based approach. We have all the tools. We have them all tied together. And now we really need to shift into showing the story, the why, the realized risk of this, and then also prove that we're controlling it. And that's why we have John on the call, right? Where with that system approach with ServiceNow, also not just doing the technical security like this, but they also have that approach to risk. I'll hand it over to John and let him give you a view of what risk and cybersecurity looks like.
Hey, thanks, Eric. And a perfect segue when we talk about how ServiceNow can address multiple factors. When we think of ServiceNow as an integrated platform, we have to mention the value in the relationships that exist between its applications, relationships that can be expanded and built upon for a better perspective on both the impact of a security operations program and the problems that can arise when it's not running properly. As Eric mentioned, there's a definite shift coming from just the purely reactive SOC to one that is more controls based, that is focusing on compliance. And IRM as a suite of applications, integrated risk management provides multiple tools that can enhance SecOps processes. When we think of policy and compliance, the idea of being compliant with internal and external regulations as applied to both configuration compliance and the build out of assets, the building of an actual network environment, the deployment of servers and firewalls and routers, and the controls that should be in place at the desktop level. Policy and compliance can help detect pre-deployment and configuration issues resulting in vulnerability prevention before a device ever hits the network. When you think of security as code, as Eric mentioned, IRM brings into it the idea of compliance as code. The idea of my CMDB is robust. It is complete. It's 3C. It's correct, complete, and compliant. But because of that, I have the data to run code in ServiceNow and validate that the configuration is actually correct. The moment a new server hits the network, I should know, and I should be able to look at that server inside ServiceNow as tools like potentially Solera or ServiceNow's Discovery brings in information about it. I should be able to tell if it's got the proper amount of RAM, whether it's configured correctly with the right passwords, if remote access is actually enabled on it. Things like that where I don't have to have a person going out and validating on a regular basis. If the data is there and the relationships are made correctly between configuration compliance and policy compliance and your CMDB, that information's always available to me. When we think about risks, if we tie risks to vulnerabilities, that provides a view of the impact and likelihood of realization based on the level of exposure, the criticality of that vulnerability, and of course the assets that are impacted across the environment. If you have a localized impact, then maybe it's a lower risk. But if you have a very widespread impact across the entire environment, you've obviously got a higher risk. And with risk assessments, with actually having risks tied to your CIs, you can roll all of that up and look at the impact of a single vulnerability across the environment as applied to the entire enterprise. Third-party risk takes that one step further. We all have vendors and companies we work with, and they are presenting risk to us, just doing business. Maybe they're not doing the right thing. Maybe the integration points that we're working with them are not secured correctly. That's a way to, again, identify inherited vulnerabilities and then leverage common controls that say, we have our integration set up specifically with these secure connections. You need to do the same thing. So being able to identify vulnerabilities internally and externally, and those inherited vulnerabilities is going to be more and more crucial, especially as we look at moving toward software as a service and cloud-based applications, and the more and more that we host things on third parties' servers, it's going to become more and more crucial. And when we look at risk events and then security incidents, they're kind of siblings. When we think of a security incident as something that's actually happened, we've had an actual breach, we have exposure out there. The risk event is the IRM corollary, where we can actually focus on the financial aspect of that exposure or even a near miss. And you can allow your risk personnel to identify what's our true loss here. And you can configure into that, like take into account the time to remediate. How long did it take us to identify that this security incident had actually happened? How long is it going to take us to fix the problem, to actually remediate this and get us back into a secure posture? And then as you build into IRM, the idea of regulatory compliance and knowing how controls change over time, the idea of privacy management, every single computer network out there with its servers that any company uses has some level of privacy required. You have customer data, you have user data, you identify individuals, and there's some level of privacy management that has to go on, and that presents additional risk. Privacy management, it gives you that deep dive into your applications and your assets holding the different types of information that must be kept secure. And it can help you prioritize the vulnerabilities and security incidents for those applications and assets, as opposed to parts of the network or servers per se that don't have privacy impact. There's no PII, things like that. Looking at our next slide, one of the biggest issues here is calculating the impact of security operations, making sure that people up the leadership chain understand that the cost of doing business as a pure cost center, because most security operations, that is a pure cost center. It provides no benefit unless you're actually functioning as a managed services company selling SecOps as a service. You have to provide the information that proves that you're both proactive and reactive. And it's crucial to understanding the value of a SecOps program. And IRM is specifically designed to provide that type of information through its risk function for quantitative analysis, per se. ISACA basically said that, the benefit of security is the difference between the inherent risk of running a business and the residual risk if controls are working correctly. And that means we have to understand what should be happening at the desktop level. We have to understand the controls that are supposed to be in place, that our server engineering teams and our network engineering teams are actually supposed to be adhering to as they go about their daily basis. You can run the best security operations SOC with the fastest response time in the industry and still be unable to prove your worth if you can't provide the metrics showing a good return on security investment. And the starting point is showing the difference between that inherent risk and residual risk as impacted by your documented controls that can be proven to be put in place. That means a policy, compliance, and a risk program. And when you think of ServiceNow, ServiceNow's IRM is perfect for that. And it dovetails and it works together with security operations, vulnerability response, security incident response. Along with this, ISACA did publish a great analysis of why it's so hard to get the data needed, but how you can look at annual loss expectancy and the total cost of ownership to start with for a foundation of risk analysis. And as we go to our next slide, Threat Connect actually put it best in that we have to consider how much exposure the company will have to any specific cyber attack. And then we have to look at the likelihood of that exposure and how it's reduced by the investment that's either being expended or considered. As Eric said, shifting from a total reactive standpoint, a posture where the security operations SOC is always looking at what do we need to address, to a posture of complying with configuration standards, complying with regulations that come down to, say, NIST or the CSIS top 20 security controls, things like that. That's where the likelihood of that exposure being reduced comes into play. SecOps from a vulnerability standpoint, it's all about reducing exposure. And security incident is about reducing impact. And when you look at that in translation to IRM, there's your likelihood and your impact for risk calculations. There's configuration that you can do. There's rules that you can put into place to address these two, to link them together better. And if implemented correctly, integrated risk management in ServiceNow can be both a resource for SecOps via a known standard of configuration for many types of devices and controls to be followed at the desktop level, meant to ensure proper deployment standards, and as a promoter, making the impact of SecOps visible through multiple KPIs. Key risk indicators, key control indicators, key security indicators can be built into the system for easy reporting and easy visibility into the true impact that makes the cost worth it. We come back to the whole concept of why we're talking today on our next slide. How does SecOps and IRM Suite working together protect your CMDB? Frankly, my own standpoint, I feel like IRM should encapsulate security operations. They should not be siloed. We should not be running IRM programs and security operations programs, and the two shall never get together. As configuration items are deployed, configuration compliance ensures the standard by which it's configured. While that configuration item in your CMDB is actually in service, policy and compliance monitors the processes at the desktop level to ensure the standards are being maintained. And as it progresses through its life cycle, risk and risk events provide the necessary corollaries to vulnerabilities and security incident to elevate the importance of the desktop activities upon enterprise security. Unless implemented consistently and correctly, the best strategy in the world will not suffice to keep your CMDB and by extension your company safe. But what I'd like to do now is bring David into this and take this discussion a little bit further.
Perfect. So we've heard from Eric Jones about the best practices in the SecOps realm, and we just heard from John Gillespie about integrated risk management and how they both play a crucial role in your SOX and SOAR program, right? And we're bringing this all in full circle to cap the end of Cybersecurity Awareness Month, because cyber attacks have held the top spot for the most common and most impactful causes of business outages across organizations for years, right? Look at any data protection trends reports, you'll see cyber attacks increasing exponentially year over year. And all of these can of course result into a catastrophe for organizations that don't have proper plans in place. One of the most crucial duties of any IT leader is to understand and prepare your businesses for interruptions by developing strategies, plans, procedures, anything to keep that business afloat if and when a disaster takes place, right? This is where business continuity management and operational resilience is really going to come into effect. So you really want to bring in your systems up to that control environment when it's intact, but make provisions to be able to really brute force a recovery for a system if necessary. Then reapply necessary controls, reapply necessary mitigating strategies, risks, so on and so forth. Because if a disaster recovery plan and business continuity plan have defined steps to follow when a system come up with the controls normally in place for those risks are mitigated to a degree, right? So your procedure in place, you're in a better position. Kind of that old saying of hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. So now I won't go through each one of these, but just as an example of a couple key differences and similarities between business continuity plans and disaster recovery. So BC really focusing on maintaining essential functions during and after a disaster. So including planning for all aspects of business to ensure ongoing operations. So worst case scenario, developing a business impact analysis, or BIA for short. Some of you might be familiar with that term. And disaster recovery specifically targets the restoration of IT systems and data after a disruption. So it's almost a subset of business continuity, focusing more on a damage assessment piece and resource availability. And kind of going back to business continuity, where it's going to encompass broader elements like a risk assessment, crisis management, communication plans, and employee training, where disaster recovery primarily is going to be including data backup, system recovery plans, infrastructure restoration, to which our AVP, Brett Carl, will talk a little bit deeper as far as data backup in a few slides, but moving on to the management responsibility of each piece. So business continuity typically involves a wider range of stakeholders, including management, operations, human resources, whereas disaster recovery usually is managed by your IT professionals, focusing on the technical strategy recoveries and your data integrity. So why I'm mentioning all this? Because finally, once you're leveraging your ServiceNow CMDB, having those dependencies in place is really going to be key, and understanding these differences can really help organizations develop comprehensive strategies to address both your business continuity as well as disaster recovery effectively, right? And so, kind of wrapping up to the next slide. So won't spend up too much time on this slide since we want to hone in on CMD protection, but just as John Glass said earlier, enterprise risk management is really composite of that integrated risk management and SecOps security operations, right? So ServiceNow's advanced risk application is where you can really have these multiple different risk strategies, whether it's operational risk, privacy risk, cybersecurity risk, to eventually roll up at that enterprise risk level, right? So more than happy to talk to you and your team on to how we can get that crawl, walk, run, and even fly approach as you develop your true SOAR and using ServiceNow as a platform, right? So Brett, I'm going to pass the baton over to you for the next few slides.
Thank you, David and John, Eric. Really appreciate it. You guys, really know your stuff when you're getting into the security side and regulatory and compliance side of different products. But I did want to also touch on a couple other areas for GlideFast from the solutions partnerships that we currently have. So the very first one I'll talk about, and this ties right back into what everyone was saying about data security and disaster recovery plan, is one of our favorite partners, Own. And with Own, you're able to use their Recover product, which helps back up your data and restore data. And so when you're looking at the entire life cycle of your ServiceNow instance, there may be a particular use case of why you would want to do that. So we'll jump into a little bit about Own, and then we've got another technology partner we want to talk about on the compliance side as well. So the biggest thing to know with Own and with ServiceNow is that you have what's called a shared responsibility model. So the analogy that I like to use is, customers, not ServiceNow, are responsible for data incidents that they create. And if you look at what ServiceNow provides from a data center approach, they're checking the box. They're making sure that you can recover your data if they have an issue. What if you have an issue, right? So the breakdown here is, ServiceNow covers the physical data center, network, host, systems, applications, but you're responsible for your data, accounts, identities, and device security. Protecting your data is the customer's responsibility. It's your responsibility at the end of the day. So just keep that in mind when we're talking about a disaster recovery and data regulation and data protection. The biggest thing to note is with Own, you're able to do backups in perpetuity, up to 99 years for your backups. So you don't have to worry about any sort of a 14-day limitation. And you can do single file restore. You don't have to worry about doing an entire platform restore, which could cause an outage from your perspective there. And just some of the top areas, like Dave was talking about with business continuity and disaster recovery, some of the top areas of concern with data corruption, data loss, or human error, bad code, integration error, migration error, or a malicious actor in your organization. We'll do a call to action at the very end here, but if anyone's interested in learning more about Own and the backup solution that they have, Recover solution for ServiceNow, you can reach out to GlideFast through our website or info@glidefast.com. The second one I want to talk about is more around the GRC IRM and one of our partners, UniFi Compliance. So UniFi Compliance has an application called Unified Application Framework, and it's essentially an API that helps you with your compliance into your ServiceNow instance. I want to pass it back to David actually to talk a little bit more about how they tie into ServiceNow with that API and some of the benefits that they offer.
Yeah, definitely. So one, Unified Compliance Framework has been part of ServiceNow ecosystem from a risk perspective and compliance perspective for years, and it is great data library for requirements, not just stateside but across the globe, especially helping our EU customers with DORA, right? That's going to be enforced coming in the new year. So getting ahead of some of these new requirements that come out on a yearly basis or semi-annual basis is really crucial, especially now that auditors are getting a more revamped practitioner's guide. They actually want to see how you're staying compliant. Where's your life cycle of an asset or system or server, et cetera? And so partnering with UCF has vastly improved all our customers, especially from a common control framework as well. So it really plays seamlessly. Integration is very light lift. I believe we have a video out there too on how to do so. But yeah, UCF can't say enough about it to help our integrated risk management programs.
Yeah, I think you did that video, didn't you, David?
At that I did.
So just to talk about just a couple of the offerings that we have a packaged offering of GlideFast that ties the GRC IRM in with UniFi Compliance framework. So essentially, if you're looking to have a ServiceNow partner work with you on your GRC implementation, these are two packages we offer as more of like a fast track approach. MVP and Platinum. You can kind of see the different benefits that you get with each one of these timelines, workshop duration, try to be very transparent on all that. And then we even throw in a 10% discount on the UCF licensing. So if you go through GlideFast, you get that as a benefit, and we've got a good relationship with the people over at UCF there. So I think David covered a little bit some of the benefits, more of that robust compliance risk management, enhanced operational resilience, strategic risk insight decision making, and so on and so forth. So if you're looking to find out more about UCF and more about GlideFast, again, just reach out to us, info@glidefast.com, or just go to our website and or reach out to your rep. So really appreciate having everybody here today. Special thanks to all of our hosts, our co-hosts, and all of our preparers on the logistics side, on the marketing team. Thank you, everybody. And I will open up for some questions.
I think we have a couple in the chat, so just kind of going through a few of those. Just how quickly can vulnerability response and security incident and risk compliance be stood up? Great question. It's kind of part of the packages that Brett showed a little bit earlier, so we'll send out the deck as well. But I'm happy to talk through each one of those and if we can combine them together and have a big uplift. So you're talking about a couple months in general, but definitely want to hear your use cases more and more on one-on-ones, as well as the prerequisites for standing up business continuity management. Having that CMDB in place with your dependencies, service mapping, and discovery really just makes it that much stronger. But again, as mentioned, we have that crawl, walk, run, and even fly approach to really help your SOAR program be as strong as it can be, right?
And David, just to kind of piggyback on that, right? The reality with how fast can, right? We know business moves at the speed of light. I'm sorry to say the cliche there, but the reality is we can only move as fast as you're ready to move. And a lot of this goes to having a lot of the conversation up front, right? This is business. The reality is that I can turn on a product and there are a baseline set of features, and ServiceNow has done an amazing job of building in really good baseline, NIST aligned run books and playbooks and, state governance flows and things like that. On the risk side, you saw that we've got that UCF integration, and we can leverage that for some very easy, quick wins. But every organization's security is different. Every organization's risk is different, right? If you're in finance versus if you're in energy versus healthcare. And so we can't really nail in, and we can't say, okay, thou shalt have these tools in 3 weeks. But as long as your organization comes to the table bought in, we can move very fast with it. And we've done it as early as 3 and 4 weeks for some organizations.
Yeah, I think we have one here around audit. Will this help me come audit time? So when we think of integrated risk management, audit is one of the actual applications that is included. And it is the idea of the internal audit. There is a factor where you can expose your internal audit platform to external auditors. So Deloitte and Touche, KPMG, et cetera. I know they've used it. But the idea of looking at integrated risk management holistically, it is the idea of looking at configuration compliance controls, looking at policy compliance controls, and the testing that goes on with them can be directly pulled into your audits. Your control test plans for design and operational effectiveness, the evidence requests, that can all be processed, and everything in ServiceNow can be pulled in and used and leveraged to give you the information needed to really tell whether you are effective when it comes to those internal audits.
Thank you, John. We do have a couple of questions here. One is any new features to highlight in the Xanadu release for SecOps? Anything you guys are excited about?
Xanadu was a lot about AI. I think we all know that. Go out to servicenow.com and you'll see it. One of the really cool features that they're really starting to really lean in on is a function across the platform called Now Assist. The idea there is exactly what it sounds like. I've spoken with a lot of security customers, right? And as soon as you put a technical security folk out there and you say, "What do you think of AI?" They balk at it, right? They look at that as just another tool. It's another cloud, right? It's just your data somewhere else. All of those slogans, but the real approach here with ServiceNow's Now Assist and some of the LLMs and everything that are underneath that is it's not going to tell you how to do your job. It's going to suggest to you things you can do better, like is the trend of these being false positive and analyzing that and telling you why. The trend of a lot of these being the same type of incident, being assigned a certain way where you don't currently have program or business logic around that assignment. So it's a very honestly, it sounds weird to say, but it's a very refreshing approach to the ways of AI. Whereas you go out and you look at a lot of other tools that say we can do AI, and it's almost like they're trying to sell it as this thing that can do your job for you. Outside of that, a lot of Xanadu from a risk, from a security, from a CMDB and everything else. We showed a slide earlier where we put enterprise risk at the top, right? Xanadu started to bring a lot of the visibility framework in for that, be via workspaces or common places to go and look. Dashboards, reports, interactive functionality where it's no longer I'm in security incident response. It's instead I'm working a thing. And that might touch all those different areas. And I'm no longer managing 4, 5, 6 lists across 4, 5, 6 workspaces. So that real kind of stitched fabric and framework of enterprise risk starts to be built out as well.
That's great. No, thanks, Eric, for bringing that up. Yeah, definitely with generative AI, big push from ServiceNow, and GlideFast has leaned into that over the past year with our expertise. So that's great that you brought that up. So appreciate it. We have one more question. What if the customer doesn't have a CMDB or the maturity is really low? How would you approach moving into this sort of data security? So obviously we're talking about the nightmare of CMDB street, but what if they don't have one, or what are the first steps to take to get to this point, from a planning perspective?
So before I jump in and give the technicals, because a lot of that has a very direct impact to security and vulnerability. John, I know you've worked with a lot of organizations that struggle with this at a risk and control posture perspective. So I'll let you start off with that.
Yeah, thanks. So when we think of IRM, it is meant to be built upon tables in ServiceNow, locations and vendors and users, and of course your CMDB. The holy grail, of course, is to get down to operational compliance and operational risk assessment at the asset level. Every server, every business application, every firewall, router, you name it. That's not always an option. So if we pull back a little and we look at a more strategic standpoint, ServiceNow is flexible. We can build what we call ad hoc entities being whatever needs to be kept compliant or monitored for risk. We can build those where there's no relationship to a CMDB. But if it's done correctly, you can build them so that the relationship can be made after the fact. We can also build things even at a higher strategic level and say, well, let's focus on the business processes involved. Let's look at the compliance with the actual process level instead of compliance for a specific thing. We can also look at, as we've been talking about ServiceNow as a SOAR, the orchestration methodology. And if orchestration is truly in place, and I've seen companies where servers at a virtual level are built very, very quickly because the orchestration package is there, the standard is there, configuration compliance maintains that standard, and we can look at how that's done at an even higher level. So from an IRM standpoint, while we can help you get to a robust, mature CMDB, we can also help you deal with the fact that you're not quite there yet.
And a question that just came in that also kind of tags right along with this. One of the unique approaches that we can take with ServiceNow, as it relates to CMDB, right, is a lot of your security tools. So John talks about being able to zoom out a little bit, right, in the risk world and look at it more strategically as opposed to that individualized item level. With security, we don't get that benefit in a lot of ways, right? If a thing is happening on a device, we need to know about the device and why. But a lot of your tools that we stitch into, your SIMs, your log analytics, your user behavior tools, your endpoint protections have that data. And I think that's one of the things that we really start to look at. For an organization that doesn't have a CMDB or doesn't have a real good approach, or maybe just kind of viewed it as an inventory historically, we can, as we're implementing or as we're looking at your security operations pieces, we can leverage those tools as additional enriching sources for your CMDB. Great example of this is vulnerability scanning. A lot of your vulnerability scanning tools, organizations take a lot of effort and give a lot of value to those, to giving them access to the environment to scan, because that's what they do and they do it well. By nature of needing to be able to scan for a vulnerability, we know that it's a Windows device so that we know to scan a certain way, much like ServiceNow's discovery tool. So with that, we can really start to work with the organizations and say, okay, cool, we're security focused and we're doing this because a thing might happen, a thing is happening, or a thing has been found. But let's reach out to your ServiceNow CMDB team, your governance teams, and say, look, we have this data as well. So we now start to prioritize that, and just by implementing a security program within ServiceNow, you start to be able to see a better CMDB fairly naturally. On the flip side of that, let's say we don't have that value and benefit. We have technical capabilities within to still, because we're integrating with that vulnerability scanner, that SIM, that endpoint, that we can still utilize those in ways within the security program and say we know enough about it to respond to it. And then leveraging and working with your organization, maybe after action, to say this wasn't in the CMDB, or we didn't have enough information. So now what does that after action flow look like? And to the question around how do you monitor and mitigate risk events, right, in your CMDB, maybe not specific to risk events, but events in general, right? With SecOps, we can tie right to your event monitoring program in ServiceNow. So where Splunk is a great example of this, where Splunk can get so granular and does a really good job of saying CPU spiked and user logged in and user elevated privilege, therefore. Well, we immediately have a risk event, user login. We immediately have a technical function, CPU spiked, and now we can stitch that in using event management. And you don't have to have ITOM event management for this. It's part of the security suite as well, where we start to be able to tie those pieces together, and we can flag your CMDB folks. We can flag the server owner. We can flag security risk and everything else that goes with it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Eric and John, for your answers for those questions. And David, amazing job. Appreciate everybody. And just want to thank everybody for joining today. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us at info@glidefast.com. Thank you for joining the webinar. Have a great day. Happy Halloween. Thank you.